So our first presenter of the day is Phoebe Walker. She is the clinical director at Windhorse Integrative Mental Health, bringing over 20 years of contemplative, body-centered, and dialogical practice to her work. Phoebe Walker, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you all being here and your time. I wanted to thank Gould Farm and Ellen Horn and Austin Riggs for bringing us all together. Sorry. And also Windhorse people, past and present, who have helped me pull myself together and hopefully this talk together, because I couldn't do it without them. All right, so the topic is crazy wisdom. And I meant to say, go back, even though I think of myself as a person who can find a good resource of calm abiding in stressful situations, public speaking is not one of them at all. It absolutely terrifies me, so you'll probably hear my voice shake a little bit and maybe stumble over a few words, and I apologize, but I hope you'll hang with me. Okay. So this is sort of an overview of what we'll cover this morning. I will offer a brief history of the crazy wisdom lineages and then identify the potential heuristic traps for the helping professions. Do a brief introduction of Buddhist psychology and the three poisons, and give an overview of contemplative psychotherapy and practice. And then discuss how crazy wisdom can inform how we navigate the inherent challenges, impasses, and dilemmas of being a human and service to other humans. So Ed Podval, you do see my cursor, who's the guy in the center there, started the first Windhorse project, and he also began his therapeutic work studying and training as a psychoanalyst at Chestnut Lodge in Maryland. He later went on to study and practice Buddhism in Boulder, where Chogyam Trungpa was his teacher. He's the guy on the bottom right there. Ed was also for a time the director of the contemplative psychology program at Naropa University in Boulder. Chogyam Trungpa was a master and teacher of both the Kagyu and Nyingma lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. He coined the term crazy wisdom to bring Western words to the unconventional teaching styles of some spiritual masters, including himself. Crazy wisdom teachers have emerged in a variety of healing traditions as a protest against increasing systemization, dehumanization, overemphasis on scholasticism or dogma, and the privileging of logic over other ways of knowing. Essentially, when the life or spirit gets drained from what are meant to be genuinely healing traditions, crazy wisdom comes along to attempt to wake us up to our humanity. And so you'll find these lineages in pretty much every tradition there is, including all of us here, I think, in terms of psychology. The Windhorse approach is really a manifestation of the merging of these two streams or lineages, Chestnut Lodge, the folks from Chestnut Lodge, and Tibetan Buddhism. They were brought together in the life and work of Ed Podval and have been carried on by Windhorse teams in the US and Europe. Both streams, however different their origins, emphasize the importance of our individual and shared humanity. As an example of this, the Chestnut Lodge folks were considered kind of crazy or heretical in some ways because they believed psychotherapy could be used with people in deep psychosis, which at the time was not thought to be true. Frida's warmth, openness, and deep hospitality was a precursor to humanistic approaches. She had a cottage on the grounds of Chestnut Lodge and would have clients into her living room to do her therapy practice. I mean, yeah, That's something. Sullivan is often quoted as saying, all of us are much more human than otherwise. And Searles, who Ed did his training analysis with, wrote, even a single moment of deeply felt intrapersonal and interpersonal relatedness is subjectively timeless, eternal, and makes up for several decades of living as less than a whole person. Ed wrote about the Washington Psychoanalytic Group. This lineage of Frieda Fromm-Reichmann, Harold Searles, and others attempted to explore the capabilities for the human transmission of sanity to its fullest extent. Fundamental to all their discoveries is the living principle that such unique human relationships are, from beginning to end, a mutual discovery between therapist and patient, a mutual journey of becoming free from personal madness. Trungpa, in his journey to North America, made the controversial decision to take off his robes and dress in Western clothes. Of this decision, he said, I can no longer attempt to preserve any privacy for myself, any special identity or legitimacy. I am not Tibetan, but human. And then Jeff, who is up here, Jeff was a part of the first Windhorse team in Boulder. He was Ed's closest student as well as a dear friend. Jeff founded the Windhorse in Northampton and has been my mentor for many years. And then I'm like often moved to tears. I'm sorry. But I'm here today because of all these people and the oral traditions that has passed between them. I feel very grateful for all of them. Okay, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Amazing. Okay. I get this fancy chair. They bring me tissues. This is great. Okay. So sorry? Thank you. Thanks. Okay. So I found myself thinking about heuristic traps and our work as helping professionals after listening to a podcast about an extreme mountaineer expert who stopped really paying attention to the terrain he was in and found himself trapped alone in a deep crevasse that he otherwise might have avoided. As it was, it nearly killed him. So heuristic traps generally are cognitive biases or mental shortcuts that can lead to flawed decision-making, especially in situations requiring careful judgment. They occur when our brain relies on familiar, often unconscious rules of thumb, leading to errors. They can show up as familiarity bias, like assuming you know the situation without proper assessment because it seems familiar. Social proof, following the crowd without critical thinking, and the expert halo, assuming an expert, including ourselves, is always right. In essence, heuristic traps are situations where our natural tendency to simplify decision-making leads us astray, potentially resulting in negative outcomes, especially in high-stakes environments. So how do these show up in our work as helping professionals? So aspects of our modern applied psychology mindset that can become heuristic traps. Thinking in opposing binaries, examples being rational or irrational, sane versus insane, diagnostic categories, I think, could fall into that. Privileging logic, reason, expertise, autonomy, and professionalism. The emphasis on measurable, definable progress and symptom relief. Focusing on curing or eliminating symptoms because it's considered a medically responsible and culturally acceptable attitude towards pain and suffering. And training in and strictly following various therapeutic systems or models that have been operationalized or manualized, as well as collecting and relying on formal information and education, including best and evidence-based practices. So again, these are examples of cognitive biases and include, familiarity, the social proof, and the expert halo. So here are some examples that might actually show up in therapeutic encounter. So this idea that we're like basically separate and isolated from one another, and that when somebody comes to see us, that it's a one-way street. It's really all about them, and that's the focus, one-way street. Also over-focusing on the person's historical and current pathology or diagnosis, relying on the subject-object duality of the therapist-client relationship, and our attempts to interpret or conceptualize these experiences as a primary means to ground our work, like using conceptualizations and this kind of duality and unpacking those as sort of the ground of our work. Leaning too heavily on being professional when we feel uncomfortable. So what if our professional mindset is obfuscating or diminishing our very basic, simple, and profound human opportunity to practice being a human in service of another human's healing as well as our own? From a Buddhist perspective, our modern therapeutic mindset is missing the point and our potential as humans entirely. Okay, and so now we're going to move into the Buddhism part. So here are, some people might have seen the one on the right? No, your left, I guess. Here are two renderings of the Buddhist wheel of life. They depict the cycle of rebirth and suffering to which all life in the material world is bound. It is much like a map of the world or the periodic table of elements, but it represents internal processes and their external effects. From the Buddhist perspective, the cognitive biases or mental traps that we get stuck in as helping professionals or as humans in general are directly proportional to our lack of awareness of the elements depicted in this wheel. So there's a lot going on here. It's basically like a map of life and the way our minds work and our psychology. So today we're just going to focus on two aspects of the wheel that can help us with our cognitive biases. The first is Yama, the monster, Yama, who is holding the wheel and represents impermanence. He's like the Lord of Death. So he's kind of menacing there, and in the other one, he's the skeleton that's basically holding the wheel of life. Who is holding the wheel and represents impermanence as a fundamental and frightening aspect of our entire experience as humans. And secondly, the very center of the wheel, which contains the three mental or energetic poisons that initially stir and perpetuate our experience of suffering. So I'll give a close-up of the center of the circle later so you can see it more clearly. We're going to start with the monster of impermanence. So it just so happened, for some reason, when I went to make this slide, the whole background went black, from blue to black, and I was like, oh, perfect, like death, destruction. So I decided to keep it. So in Buddhism, impermanence is a core concept that signifies the transient nature of all phenomenon. Everything, including our bodies, thoughts, and emotions, is constantly changing, decaying, and eventually ceasing to exist. Impermanence isn't just about physical change, it also applies to mental states, relationships, and even the universe itself, which is constantly in flux. This is a younger version of Ed Podville picture. So in contemplative or Buddhist psychology, the constant psychological crisis is not in failing to establish a substantial enough ego or identity, but rather in failing to recognize that our identities and ego are unstable and always falling apart. So examples of impermanence that we experience all the time, the frequent alternations between pleasure and pain. We're constantly fluctuating between a sense of having and not having, knowing and not knowing, hope and fear. We have minds full of changing storylines and discursive thoughts about ourselves and others. We're really good at making up stories. Questions of are we winning or losing, bad or good. We can know ourselves to be one way and behave another, like I think of myself as fairly calm, and I'm completely freaking out right now. So there you go. We have experiences of attraction, aversion, and disinterest in regards to other people and our interactions. So like we can often have like any one of those experiences with the same person from moment to moment. And often like, you know, you walk into a room and it's like you naturally feel yourself drawn to someone and sort of put off by another or not interested at all in another. It's happening all the time. Beneath this drama of our lives, all the desires, fantasies, wants, dislikes, paranoia, there is this impermanence which gives rise to a barely perceptible but constant undercurrent of existential anxiety, uncertainty, and doubt about the whole situation. Though it is mostly out of our awareness, like the inner workings of a dashboard, in response to the reality of impermanence, we are constantly trying to establish some territory, security, or certainty. So there are pressures, both internal and external, within the therapeutic context that heighten our need for permanence, autonomy, and security. So as helping professionals, we'd like to remain clearly on the side of the good, know what we were doing, and maintain our self-esteem, our role, and our ego. In order to manage our own existential anxiety, we mindlessly move towards trying to maintain our certainty, security, and esteem as professionals and within the therapeutic encounter. Are we doing okay so far? Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so here is the depiction of the very center of a wheel. There's the bird, the snake, and the pig who are sort of like chasing after each other. The bird is apparently a particular bird that exists in Tibet that like mates for life, and they're really attached to each other, and so that's why the bird for attachment. The snake can obviously jump up quickly and bite, and the pig is sort of like doesn't really care where it is or what it's eating or that kind of thing. Anyway, so those are the representations. So these energies are manifestations of this constant grasping for security and certainty, which tend to generate more suffering and pain for ourselves and others. They are the source of all suffering in the material world, from the Buddhist perspective, and within therapeutic relationships, and they can lead to what we call burnout. Perhaps we can mostly agree that these attitudes, in the very least, are problematic in the context of therapeutic relationships. And yet, in the intimacy of the therapeutic encounter or any intimate relationship, we can find ourselves in the throes of all three. We might call these feelings that get stirred in us by the overarching scholarly or professional name of countertransference. Tamer versions might show up as attraction, aversion, or disinterest also within the therapeutic encounter. More generally, from a Buddhist perspective, all of us as humans are always moving between attraction and aversion and indifference, resisting pain with aversion, grasping onto pleasure with passion. Mindlessly going about all of this, as we tend to do, generates pain and suffering. It's how mental health challenges manifest and clinicians get out of balance. But it's also a part of our shared humanity and can be worked with in service of more ease and connection. So we're going to take a little closer look. So Ed used the term dedicated therapist to represent the ways that the three poisons show up in therapeutic work. I like to think of it as overly dedicated, keeping in mind that it's a bit of a misnomer or illusion that when we act in these ways, we are truly dedicated to the well-being of our clients, when in fact we are likely more concerned with shoring ourselves up in some way. So passion or attraction shows up as grasping at being helpful, can also show up as a kind of like energetic like rescue mission to whoever we're relating with. Aggression or aversion shows up as a forceful move towards curing. And ignorance or disinterest can show up as a kind of denial of the other person's humanity or retreating into a kind of professionalism. As individual practitioners, we tend to have one energy that we predominantly fall into. So there might be one that you feel a connection to. Generally, the dedicated therapist is overly attached to or detached from a particular change in an attempt to avoid uncertainty or manage the pain, suffering of another person or limit their own. So in terms of passion or attraction, again, this grasping at being helpful. There's a desire to magnetize clients towards our own version of health and save them from their degraded environment or mind. We gain enormous satisfaction out of being useful or helpful, and the general attitude would be, I know what's best, I will help you in some way, some knowing. And I've debated about different examples to bring up, and I guess what I'll say is that I think that energetically, it's almost like as if you're seeing a vase falling off a table or something, and you're sort of like, oh, and that is, so it can just show up as that. It could also show up as one time with my therapist of 15 years, for whatever reason I was talking about the quick oatmeal that I make in the morning. And he never did this, but this one time he just went on this whole diatribe about steel cut oats and cooking them overnight and just had to transform me into his better version of oatmeal in some way. I have no idea why. But those things can happen all the time. And even as I've been preparing for this talk, I don't know that anybody could reach me in my nervousness, but people are they have their advice and these things, and I'm just looking at them there's no way I can get from where I am to where they are, and yet it makes them feel good to give me some advice, which I really appreciate and adore the intention there. But also, so there's oftentimes I think when we offer things that seem simple to us in some ways, but are a really far distance for the person that we're with. So ultimately, this can rob people, or the other thing this might come up in is if you're in, not in a therapy room, but if you're out in the world on the farm or out in the community, with Ellen Horn or with Windhorse, where you're watching somebody navigate the world, and you're oh no, about the interaction, and there's just this sense of I've got to do something about this somehow, or to step in some way that's going to smooth the situation. But ultimately that robs people of their confidence and self-determination. I mean, there's probably skillful ways to be useful. Okay, aggression or aversion can show up as this cure. Often it shows up in response to content or behavior that we don't understand or that scares us, like deep psychosis, mania, and depression. There is this desire to sort of put our health or the health of the consensual world into the other person, and can come up in response to clinical frustration or fear. And the general attitude, again, is this needs to stop at all costs, right now. I think it's also common with people, when you're working with people who lead with a kind of anxious, ambivalent attachment styles, they're often labeled as borderline personality disorder. And when they're angry with me, or somehow find the most specific personal way to completely insult me, my response, some internal part would be this is not okay, this needs to stop. And I think when we respond with that kind of energy or even those words, it translates to like, you are not okay, and like further intensifies the shame that is already so much a part of their experience. So ultimately it could lead, and then on a whole other level, it could lead to over-medicating, over-controlling, disempowerment, and forced disconnection or silence about what's really happening for our clients. Like if we don't want to hear it, they're not going to share it. Okay, and then finally, ignorance or disinterest, which comes across as professionalism or a kind of denial of humanity. This one is, I think, the most insidious of the three because it can show up as a kind of global mindset in which the other two poisons can quietly like simmer. So it's like we might be having an aversion or attraction experience, but we're like also like trying to be professional. And so we're trying to, and it's like hard, and that wears on us over time. So relying heavily on technique and ethical codes of conduct, maintaining distance in the duality of the therapist-client relationship, as well as the illusion of objectivity and superiority regarding the therapist's health. There's this, again, the one-way street. This is about you. Any generosity, care, or frustration on the part of the client towards the therapist is considered needless or a transference from a past relationship, and not necessarily like legitimate in the context of the actual relationship. Ultimately, this could lead to ignoring or denying the fact that our clients are having their own intimate, concerned, hopefully helpful relationship with us, that they have the very same human heartfelt connection to the possibility of being useful. One way that this could show up that's not represented on the slide more specifically, or in that global kind of way, is like when somebody, I'm trying to like use an example that's not specific, but like, when you see somebody time after time after time, and it's like the same, it feels like the same story every time. It's like, this again, and you just sort of like, maybe I'll just like quietly wait and it'll end. Somehow you tune out, you start planning whatever you're having for lunch. And there's a sense of distraction, and somehow in that, like you're missing the potential that there might be some kind of subtle difference that is happening or being communicated through the body or through the language that, that it's not the same every time. It's just, it can't be. It's just not. But it's easier for us to feel that way. Another example might be like working from one theoretical framework that sort of forecloses the opportunity for another more accurate understanding or connection, or even just working from a framework at all, where you're like, it's like, the hammer and the nail thing. Like if you're holding a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and you might be missing completely the person's like actual context and meaning-making mechanism or something like that. Okay, so from a Buddhist perspective, the fact that we are born in the human realm is a very fortunate actual incarnation. We're not animals, but I would love to be an animal. Probably, I wouldn't have to be sitting up here if I were an animal, probably. But also because we do this therapeutic work and we have the potential to transmute or transform the energy of the three poisons for the benefit of others and ourselves. So therapy relies on our humanness, even as our unchecked mental and emotional habits may get in the way. As part of our natural infrastructure as humans, we have the potential or capacity to be interested in and care about others and to relate to each other in a way that increases our sense of ease and belonging. We have every opportunity to fully experience life through direct and present experience. And through meditation and self-reflection, we can get to know ourselves exactly as we are. Our natural instinct towards wakefulness or encountering the truth means that we have the potential to move beyond stagnation, laziness, blame, and ambivalence. So, now I'm having a moment of like, why is this slide here? So as a way of a contrast, I think that most times when people come to see us, it's like we get mostly like a history of what's gone wrong. And Ed was very adamant, and we are at Windhorse, around like getting a history of somebody's sanity too, and the strength that they've brought along, that there's a sort of equal inquiry into that as there is to whatever has been challenging. When we contrast those things, our history of illness or pathology has a way of seeming like the totality of our experience, particularly when we're seeking therapeutic help. So it's not only just for the therapist who's looking for that. It's like the person in crisis is like, this is all there is, kind of thing. Our history of soundness or wakefulness can often be obscured or overlooked as it is more episodic, fleeting, and delicate than our pathology. When we are in despair, we lose sight of the wakefulness, dignity, and patience that are very much a part of our history of being. These things show up even in the midst of pathology. While most of our human instincts strive towards personal security, justification, or pleasure, the instinct towards wakefulness is the urge to penetrate beyond this fruitless cycle that is continuously eroding. Only by studying the nature of our own minds and becoming intimate with our own wakefulness can we recognize it and appreciate it in others. I quote from Ed, he's older now again. When a psychotherapist relates directly to others' wakefulness and becomes curious about the history of their sanity, a different kind of relationship develops, one of mutual appreciation and trust, not based on dependence, hope, or even memory. One could ponder that for a while. I certainly have. Okay, so in contemplative psychology and practice, skillful means arise from the awareness of the reality of impermanence, our fundamental interdependence, the fullness of the present moment, and that we humans are more alike than different. It is grounded in the cultivation of our most basic mindfulness, awareness, and compassion, which needs to be guided by a variety of personal practice. So thank you so much. That's great. She is. She's like the #1 rescuer. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Kat. So there's the actual personal practice of meditation or mindfulness awareness, but there's also, and compassion practice, which I wish I had a lot more time to go into, but I don't exactly. But also ways to support this kind of awareness is through supervision and intervention. So there's like an interpersonal aspect to it as well. And I would say that, like, in a sense, in contemplative psychotherapy, it's like what's happening is that you're taking a personal practice and expanding it into an interpersonal practice. Like you're doing the same thing. It's just a wider field. Anyway, so necessary requirements to do this work seems to be a kindness and openness towards oneself, or towards one's own pain, suffering, and uncertainty, which the contemplative practices are designed to do. Mindfulness, awareness, and compassion practice is essentially the work the clinician does with their own minds and emotions. It allows us to become acquainted with the basic unconditional wakefulness or awareness that is inherent in everyone, including ourselves. It cultivates a fearless attitude towards thought and emotional processes of every kind, and it acknowledges the total range of human responses and gives us a way to work with them and ourselves and within the therapeutic relationship. With this kind of openness, we can relate to things as they are rather than as we would like them to be. It's a complete openness and willingness to look into whatever arises within us, the other, and between us, to work with it and relate to it as a part of the overall process. Everything can be a stepping stone on the path. Mindfulness awareness helps us to not overmanage people based on our own discomfort and to bring forward our wisdom, which may appear crazy or unconventional, but is based on the present moment experience of ourselves and the other that we're with. So the implications of contemplative therapeutic practice is that it involves being in uncertainty a lot of the time. There's also an initial feeling of sacrifice and well-meaning, a kind of giving up of our territory, all the self-identifications that bolster us, turning towards pain without resistance or aversion, letting go of trying to shore things up, letting go of preferences, and really inviting the other person in. So there's a radical breathing in or opening to the dilemma and pain of the other as a movement towards intimacy and compassion. We remain skeptical of any conscious intention to be a healer or a helper, since these intentions are often motivated by our own desire to reduce anxiety and confusion or to force change in the client. We work to dissolve the restrictions we usually place on ourselves, like avoiding suffering or maintaining appearances. We notice all the feelings, impulses, thoughts, and beliefs that are arising for us in relation to our clients. And we notice all of this experience with compassionate awareness, hold it lightly, and let it go. That's really important. It's like both be aware of what's happening, but to not get too attached to it in any particular way. So it's just a noticing. It's information that's coming along, but to not get too attached. So this is William James. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui, if I say that right, if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. And I could be wrong here, but it doesn't seem like a lot of our social work, mental health, they don't really teach this. At least when people come to Windhorse having just, they don't, this would be a great education. And I think the contemplative practice helps. So this is essentially what we learn how to do through contemplative practice. As therapists, we may not be experiencing florid psychosis, but our attention is continuously being drawn away from the present moment by our hopes and fears, our comfort and discomfort, our desires and aversions, our fantasies and theories. From a Buddhist perspective, much of the time we are all experiencing psychosis, it's just not as obvious. So mindful awareness practice helps us become more adept at noticing when we lose touch with our wakefulness and fall into daydreaming or detached thinking. And it also helps us expand the time and space between feeling our transient desires to help, cure, or escape into professionalism and actually acting on them. And so there's a bit of, there's always that uncertainty. If you're not going to go with that initial impulse or thought or into the conceptualization, you're kind of sitting in uncertainty and trusting something of the environment, tuning into the environment, that the resources that are needed with you and the other person and in the space itself are going to find their way through, which is can be a challenging place to be. But the contemplative practice helps us sit in that uncertainty and get more used to it. I would also say, I think one of the reasons why dialogical processes integrate well with Windhorse is because the kind of comfort with allowing the space and sort of associations or the resonances, the images to arise, like that's sort of what's happening when you're in your personal practice anyway. So there's a sense of trusting in that kind of wisdom coming forward. And so I think it can really support people in terms of doing dialogical work and resourcing. You know, and yeah, I hope that makes sense. So the implications of contemplative therapeutic practice. In this way, our reactions, countertransferences, interpretations, and cognitive ideas become stepping stones towards further opening to a more direct experience, more spontaneity, and more opportunity to offer our clients access to new experiences of themselves. And I guess I would say, too, that, like, you know, in terms of the three poisons as they arise, you don't necessarily, there's not this sense of, like, having to make meaning of it. It's more of, like, noticing that the energy is happening and that it's interfering in some way and kind of letting it go, like opening, you know, or softening in some way that's... So it may not be, I mean, maybe that's the point about beyond memory. And the quote from Ed is that you just have to find your humanity. You don't necessarily have to make up stories about it. Okay. Here we are. Okay, so when we are able to notice when the three energies grab us internally, we have the opportunity to transform them. So ignorance or professionalism or a kind of distance can become spaciousness or a fearlessness. Passion can become gentleness or compassion, and aggression can become intelligence or clarity. When I first became the clinical director in Northampton, I was kind of intimidated by the whole thought. And I was talking with Jeff, my mentor, who you saw at the beginning, and I was like, oh my God, like, what have I been empowered to do? Like, what, you know, like, totally freaked out, thinking he was going to give me some kind of, like, complicated couple of paragraph, if not more, answers in words. And basically, he said, you've been empowered to be humble, kind, it still brings me to tears, humble, kind, and honest. And it was just like, oh my God, like, that I can actually try and do, like, you know, and I think, you know, and working with folks who are, you know, so, like, yeah, I'm working with folks who've been isolated or found their way into some kind of psychotic state, like, these things go a long way, you know, like there's a way of restoring of them. I mean, they can feel like they're not human anymore, you know, and so in offering those things, we make everybody a little more human. Anyway, and it's the best thing anybody ever said to me, pretty much. Okay. So crazy, the word is derived from an old English word meaning full of cracks. We humans, without exception, are full of cracks. We are constantly eroding, there are bits falling away, and new pieces and slightly different configurations emerging. The wisdom part is about waking up to this fact, allowing for it and finding some equanimity and generosity in spite of it. So this reminded me of kintsugi. Am I saying that right, Eric? Which is a Japanese art using gold lacquer to mend broken pottery, which basically embraces imperfection and brokenness as part of its beauty and resilience. It also reminds me of this Leonard Cohen song anthem, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So going back to the mountaineering metaphor from a while back, the theoretical maps we follow, like actual maps and rules, are helpful, but they only get us so far. They will never accurately represent the actual terrain, the visible and invisible risks and opportunities that are present on a given day. Even all our prior experience, it's something, but it's also nothing. At some point, we have to find our way to be okay out there with all of that, to begin to pay attention to and work with the actual path that appears, opening to the uncertainty, as well as welcoming the strength inherent in our interdependence and the collective brilliance of our humanity. So from the viewpoint of crazy wisdom, this is Lama Liz Munson, who wrote a whole book about mad yogis. The truths displays are always conditional, always relational, always reawoken into the present moment by the situations in which and to which the saint, or in our case, the therapist or helper person, is summoned. Okay. Those are some references. Oh, I forgot one. So here we're back to Frida. So here's a quote of hers, or a paraphrase of hers, I think. There's really no such thing as a technical mistake. There can only be mistakes of the heart. And so I think when we're motivated, when we're moved by the poisons, like those are the kind of heart mistakes that we can make. And it's not just, somebody can have all the best intentions as they're rescuing or they're trying to be professional or whatever, and it's not about intentions. It's about finding space and actual compassion and heart. Okay, I think I'm almost out of my misery here. And those are just references, but that's it.
For questions and thoughts. Or we can take our break early, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It's really interesting. I feel very connected to what you're speaking about and the lineage. Otto Will came to be the medical director of Austin Riggs from 67 to 78. And he brought Ed Podval with him, who's our director of education. Yeah. And I think what's true of all of us trying to work with patients with psychosis is we're trying to figure out how to connect with a person in the most human, deep, meaningful way without losing our way in some way and being present. And so I thank you for your presentation, bringing us back to that central goal.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Other questions, reflections?
I feel much like you feel, I think, when I do public speaking, and I really appreciated your authenticity and your tears and sharing what your experience is like, even as you're offering all this great teaching, and so I feel like your humanity and your presence is really what helped the information to really be grounded as we're learning, so I just wanted to make that.
Thank you.
I'm trying to avoid the poisons here, but...
Okay. Are you going to rescue me?
I thought that was just profound. I just think it was. I think it captured the struggle within psychotherapy, independent of these thoughts, the struggle to get to that place where you're connected in uncertainty. And I just thought it was... I have nothing else to say. I'm just kind of blown away by it.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you might be able to comment on attachment being the root of all suffering from the perspective of the therapist and from the perspective of someone who is having a psychotic experience or an alternate experience.
Can you tell me something about how you heard attachment?
Let's see. just in terms of, some of the Buddhist teaching, the teaching that attachment is the root of all suffering, and how the holding on and gripping to, as you were mentioning, if you were caught up in one of the 3 poisons, so to speak, if you could comment on how that attachment could be best managed.
Yeah, well, I don't know if this will exactly answer the question, but I think, the idea that we're losing bits and pieces and parts of ourselves like all the time. It's happening endlessly. So again, going back to that idea of impermanence, like that's suffering in and of itself. And then when we try and like not let that happen or hold on too tightly, it like adds a whole other layer of suffering and angst and consternation. Like if we can, like essentially I would say like our human, I don't know, if we can move beyond that and just accept the fact that this is all falling apart, no matter who we are, and be somewhat okay with that, then yeah. And I think that psychosis in and of itself is a kind of there is that grasping for certainty, and like it's happening we do it differently maybe than somebody who's in psychosis, as the helping person, but it's the same thing, and it just increases suffering. Yeah, because it's happening anyway, and if we can find a way to be at peace with it, I think, yeah, if that is a, yeah. Thank you.
Do you have any recommendations of how to, learn more about Buddhism, either just in of itself or as it relates to psychotherapy?
Yeah, I should. I'm looking at my colleagues like, oh yeah. What would I? Well, I think. Yeah, I mean, there's there's a book that one of the references actually, which I could share with you, that's called Brilliant Sanity, and it's a collection of essays. I also think exploring some kind of like mindfulness practice that's about being with the present moment and what's happening in the present moment, and also a compassion practice that's like a direct practical experience, and I'm happy to share other resources too, but Brilliant Sanity is one book that comes to mind it's a broad swath. Also, Karen Kissel-Wegala, she I'm not going to remember the title of the book, but she's another great author who's written about it. Yeah.
I don't know if this is possible. Could you just take a few minutes, if you were in a meeting with a person undergoing a psychotic experience, how might the exchange go? Like even a couple of sentences. How would you start? How would you be there? I know it's not all about the words, but
yeah, I mean, I think. Well, I probably wouldn't. One of the things we say in terms of what we call the practice that we do basic attendance when we're relating with other people, and that's sort of the ground of whether you're doing psychotherapy or you're out in the world together. And the first thing is being present and letting be. And there's this idea of kind of crouching, not like crouching, but like making oneself kind of smaller in a little bit of way. And tuning into, so that's something that I would practice, this sort of like getting smaller in a kind of way, and allowing and tuning into the space. So it might not be that I actually engage verbally, but it could also be that I'm sitting there tuning into this space, sort of noticing what's happening in my body, and I might actually just remark on something that's happening for me in the moment, like whatever transient, like similar to like as you're listening to a dialogical process, like things emerge, and so I might just speak it out loud, and I mean, again, it depends on how verbal or unverbal the person is, but there's a sense of really making room for the other person, and Freddie, who is busy, we have a like ridiculous ability at Windhorse to be in silence without discomfort. So, so that might be part of the experience of not really saying, just being in the space together until it feels safe in some way, yeah.
I'm trying to reconcile two thoughts in my mind. Maybe you can help me. So, thinking about how we try to lead a meaningful life. I'm comparing that thought with, quote, being at peace with everything falling apart. It's hard for me to fit those two concepts together. It's hard for me to say that a meaningful life is achieving that state of being at peace with things falling apart. Can you transport me between those two ideas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody else might be able to answer this more, but so in Buddhism, there's the idea of the relative and the absolute. So like in the absolute sense, we're all going to die. It's all impermanent. It's all, and so we're holding that, but there's still this relative life that we're living and that's meaningful to us. And so we can move towards something that's meaningful to us. But then there's also the sense of like holding it a little lightly in some way or another. So if it doesn't work out, it doesn't like completely crush us. So we are in both worlds at the same time, and we're juggling those. Does that?
Yeah, no, I can accept ambiguity and uncertainty.
Yeah. And the relative world is very real. I mean, we're all moving around in it. We can't get away from that. Yeah. Jen?
Oh, I really loved your talk. I thought it was super rich. And I was wondering if you could make your talk available on a PDF so that we can share it. I'd like to read it, actually.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Sure. Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we're actually at time, but hold on to these thoughts. We're on a break right now, so find Phoebe and ask your questions now.
Okay. Thank you.